In the Company of Charity is a podcast by the Daughters of Charity of St. Vincent de Paul. Each episode will be discussing the church, society, and service to others, all through the lens of the spirit we received from St. Vincent de Paul, the Saint of Charity. Join in the conversation by sending your comments and questions to companyofcharity@gmail.com.
Well, here we are.
Oh, goodness. Another episode. We're so excited.
We're so excited.
We're having a ball so far, are we not?
So tell us about this one. Tell us a little bit about what
the person who's joined us, y'all are about to have your minds blown. Her name is Lauren Scharmer. She's a youth minister from the St. Louis area and a friend. And so we are in her company today talking about authentic friendships. And I thought a great way to start is to take us on back into scripture from Sirach. And this is, if you want to look it up, Sirach chapter 6, verses 14 and 15. A faithful friend is a sturdy shelter. He who finds one finds a treasure. A faithful friend is beyond price. No sum can balance his worth.
Nice. Sirach. I just love Sirach.
There's so many. It's so wise.
Yeah. So that's a great quote. So we're going to be talking today about faithful friendship.
Exactly. And I think one of the most important things, when we look at sort of our lifespan, oftentimes our friends come from just who we happen to be around. I know for me in high school, that was, people in choir and youth group, and people happen to be around the neighborhood. And, as we get older and as we progress and move to different life stages, friendship is really, really important. And I think who we surround ourselves with, they say you're the combination of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Yeah. It's interesting when you think about friends, especially as you're thinking about friends when you were a kid, and then you had like your best friend, and then there were the other friends that you had, and you thought those best friends were going to be your best friend for the rest of your life, and then as you get older, of course, things change and you move on, but there's always somewhere around one of those friends that no matter how long you've been away from each other, you call, you connect somehow, and it's like you've never been parted. And, you just kind of start up right where you left off, and you realize those are the kind of people that have connected with you at that soul level. I think, it's a different kind of friendship than maybe the ones who are in your life at the moment, who you hang out with, who you have coffee with, who you call when you're trying to make a big decision.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so it's really, I think, really interesting was, who do we call friends? Certainly, in the age of Facebook and everything else, who's friended me? We can have like a million people who we don't really even know. So I think it's really important to bring in scripture, to bring in that sense of the Spirit. Who are those people that God has put in our lives, whose paths He has helped us to cross, so that not just that we meet really cool and wonderful people, but that we're better people because of them. That something about us becomes better, becomes more whole. That without them, something would be missing in our lives. That's what I always think about when I think about a faithful friendship. It's not just that they're loyal to me, but that they're full of faith. They're full of the faith in God, that God somehow has really drawn us together. And because of that, we have something really to give and take from each other, which is, I think, the beautiful part of friendship.
Yeah. I used to say I always wanted to look out and hang around with people who are smarter than me, funnier than me, holier than me, so that hopefully those things would rub off. But I think the other side of the coin is, how am I being that person for other people? Am I being that example and that light and that energy to support other people and what they're going through too?
Yeah, definitely. Can I be a support to other people? Can I kind of put aside my own needs too? Sometimes you're in a relationship where you are the one that really kind of needs that support, and then you realize sometimes you're called to step up as well and to be a support. The friendship's got to be a mutual experience and relationship, that it's not all about one giving and one taking, but really working with each other and seeing the Spirit work, really letting the Holy Spirit in to help guide it.
Exactly. And Lauren will be offering us some excellent insights into this. And I think, one thing I will say is, as people who are connected into a religious community, it certainly adds a whole different dimension to our relationships and friendships, within the community, because we have the dimension of a shared spirit. And so it is a blessing to have friends outside of the community and friends in my family and people I grew up with. But I think having good friends in other Daughters of Charity who are close to me and good friends, it just makes it, it just adds another dimension, another flavor to it that I certainly didn't expect coming into the community in that way that I've experienced it. So.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think sometimes you look back and, I know sisters that I've become friends with, I realize, only because of community have I even had any kind of connection with people from different parts of the country, or, you kind of stick with your own space sometimes and realize you're in your own circle. But community really gives you that opportunity to meet people from other areas, but also, not just areas of the country, certainly, but areas of faith, people's spirituality, how they've come to this place of community. How are we in company with each other? And it can be a really beautiful thing. You begin to realize that friendships can go so much deeper than we think they can. And it really is a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Well, the God himself is Trinity, so it makes a lot of sense that we need to be in relationship in order to be close to God and to grow and just serve.
Yeah, it's beautiful, sister. Beautiful.
Yeah, always.
Like
so it. Without further ado, we will introduce you all to Lauren Scharmer and enjoy this episode. So welcome, Lauren Scharmer, to the podcast.
Hello.
We are so excited that you're here. Lauren and I actually know each other, but I'll let you tell the story. So little background about who you are, about where you're coming from, what you do now, how we know each other, etc., etc., etc.
Sure. So as Sister Liz said, my name is Lauren Scharmer. I currently serve as the Director of Youth Ministry for a multi-parish youth ministry program here in St. Louis. So I moved here 4 years ago after I graduated college to come here and to respond to the Lord's invitation to serve these teens here, which has been a great joy and privilege. Nothing I ever thought I would be doing, but as it is with the Lord, I'm happier than I ever thought I would be. And one of the most beautiful parts about being here in St. Louis is the people that the Lord has put in my life all across the board, and that certainly lies true of our friendship, Sister Liz. And we actually feels like, as we were talking about earlier, that we've known each other for
years,
1,000 years through a lot of other people. Especially, we cannot not give a shout out to our dear friend Christina Jarian, for sending us both a text saying, "You two should be friends," which is a beautiful part about the Christian life when our friends become friends with each other.
Exactly.
So that's what happened all those years ago. Here we are.
And here we are hanging out.
I am, admittedly, Sister Liz's #1 fan. So I think...
And my PR, right?
I am her. If you have not yet watched Sister Liz's music video, Sister Liz and a handful of other people singing "What a Beautiful Name It Is," go watch and then come back.
And subscribe.
Anything else? I think we're done now.
All right, plug all the things. So today we're talking about real friendships, authentic friendships. And so before we even dive into all of that, we have to define our terms. So give us a little bit about that.
Sure. So I think, by and large, we live in a world that has sort of forgotten how to be in relationships. And that is why so many people struggle in a relationship and in a friendship, let alone a relationship with the Lord, because we've forgotten how to be in relationships. And so ultimately, from a philosophical perspective, that friendship is someone who wills our good, and someone who desires our good. And what that looks like, I think, practically lived out. And we see in the Gospels all these examples of Jesus calling his friends, of these ordinary men who were in relationship with each other and then were in relationship with Jesus. And from that is the apostolic foundations of the church. And so I love that we see that Jesus always sent them out 2 by 2. And he always sent them out. And we know that they weren't always the best of friends, as it can happen. Right. But he sent them out to be with each other. And so we look for, and even, the Old Testament is littered with friendships too. In a beautiful way. So our guide for that is what Jesus first did, which was he called his friends, and from that they were commissioned to go out and to share the good news. So I think a friend is ultimately someone who does what Jesus did, which is we call each other to be more, and from that place is where the Lord commissions us.
And so it's important to go beyond the superficial, and Jesus obviously was an example of that, of having these dudes around him, good times and bad, miracles, crowds, and all of that. And then also the same thing to the cross, and allowing them to see him even in his most vulnerable moments.
Yeah, and I think we see in scriptures, we hear all these stories of Jesus warning his friends, right? That, I may not be with you that much longer. And of course he knew exactly what was going to happen because he's God. And he invites them with him. He invites them to the cross, right? And yet, when we look, who stuck around? Not very many people. And even his closest friend, the one that he chose first, denies him, right? So we see sort of like, Lord, who did you choose? Like these yahoos over here, like what are they doing, right? But it was the people who were there with Jesus at the foot of the cross, that they were the first ones that then saw the glory of the resurrection. So I think what the Lord teaches us about relationships, sort of the 30,000-foot view, is he teaches us that when we rally around each other, even in our crosses and in our pain, then we are front row spectators to what the Lord does with the resurrection in each of our lives. And the only thing Jesus does with the cross is the empty grave. And so we are invited as baptized people to participate there with each other in the crosses, but ultimately there with the empty grave.
I think one of the coolest things to reflect on is the fact that Jesus invites us into the life of God, and his modeling of that, of intimacy with the Father, and just to say, or even rejoicing in the Holy Spirit, we hear that in the scriptures too, of here's the kind of relationships that we should have.
Yeah.
Ones of depth, ones of intimacy, ones of saying, yeah, not my will, but yours. And that's what we have to go on. That's a great example.
Yeah, absolutely. And that he calls us to an intimacy with him, and then as a fruit of that, into a deep intimacy with each other. And oftentimes, as it is with the Lord, it is deeper and greater and wider and harder and more beautiful, I think, than we could ever have imagined on our own earthly terms. And that certainly, Sister Liz, is something that the world does not understand. Like it sees relationships as a way, as an immediate benefit to ourselves, and that, our world says friendships are based on what we do and not who we are, and the gospel completely turns that on our head and says that friendships and relationships are rooted not in what we do, but precisely who we are. Come crosses, come all.
And so how do we have those relationships and be able to be real and vulnerable with others? What does that even look like?
Yeah, I think, obviously speaking from experience, I'm very, very grateful for the people that the Lord has put in my life and for the friends He has given me. And I heard someone say once that I always beg God to show up in a burning bush, and he always shows up through people and through relationships. And so I think the first and foremost is to put on that lens of realizing that the Lord intends to speak to us through each other, right? It has been like that since the time of Jesus and even before that. And so to know that the people he puts in our life, he actually intends to use for our good, and he actually intends to use to show us more of who we are and show us more of who he is. And so I think to just first realize that, okay, the Lord actually wants to speak to me through these people. But these people can't speak to us. The Lord can't speak to us through these people. So often we build up all these walls around ourselves because we fear really being known. And I think one of the most beautiful examples I had, I was coming off last summer a few days away with some friends, and we were sort of all in different but hard seasons. And I remember just remarking that day as I was flying back here to St. Louis that the deepest desire of the human heart is to be seen, known, and loved by God. And when we have friends in our lives who first see, know, and love the Lord and know that they're seen, known, and loved by him, and then when as a fruit of that they pour into us and they allow us to be seen, known, and loved, something amazing happens. And, looking at my life and in my relationships, that the greatest and deepest and most beautiful relationships that the Lord has given me have been the friends who have seen me sort of at my absolute worst, and not just who've seen me at my worst and have seen me in my deep pain, and who have spoken truth and light and life into me in that position. And that's uncomfortable, right? No one wants to admit that we're broken. No one wants to admit that we're weak or that we need people. And what the Lord has taught me so much, especially this last year, and what's been a difficult season, has shown me again and again, like, I will give you people to show me who I am. And as they are showing you who I am, they are showing you who you are. And I can just think of just one sort of example, I think, to sort of sum this up. I called a friend several months ago and was weeping and sharing this really difficult thing that had happened. And before, because we want to fix everything, right? We want, when a friend calls us crying, I'm thinking, who do I need to beat up or what do I need to do to like make this immediately better, right? But something amazing happened in this conversation. So I'm telling this friend what's happened in a situation completely beyond my control that was deeply painful. And she just said, before I say anything else, I want to say that I'm with you and I'm not going anywhere. And I think, Sister Liz, in a world that is so transitory, right, and is so always constantly seeking to get to the next place, to seeking to do the next thing, to accomplish the next task, to have people, to not just meet us in our vulnerability, but to actually say, I'm not going anywhere. Like, I see you and I love you and I know you and I'm with you and I'm not going anywhere. And those friendships have been the ones that have completely changed the course of my life and have shown me who Jesus is again and again and again.
It's a temptation to want to solve the problem.
Yeah.
And want to end the suffering, want to make sure that things go better, when the reality is people want to be listened to. They want someone who's with them. They want someone who's not going to just provide an easy answer, especially when things are so hard. Because that's superficial.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I even just think about a conversation I had with a friend a few years ago who was coming up at a time in their life of immense suffering. And the first thing I said, because I didn't know what to say, and at that point I knew that I couldn't fix it. It was just, I couldn't even tried. I would have if I could have, but was not able to. And I just said, I don't even know what to pray for you, but I'm going to pray that you never once would feel alone. And that you would know that this immense cross that the Lord is asking you to carry, that I love you, not in spite of this cross, but because of it and with it. And I think we're so afraid, Sister Liz, that our cross was precisely the thing that Jesus used, right? Like, that is actually what he chose to bring about the empty grave. And yet we, in our fickle and weary hearts, we are like, well, no, the Lord couldn't possibly use my cross, right? He couldn't possibly use this hard thing in my life. And so that ultimately the crosses of our lives are something that the Lord uses as an invitation to be loved, not for what we do, right, but for who we are. And that the Lord invites us to deep relationships where we're known not in spite of our crosses, but actually because of them and with them.
And so as, as church people,
right,
as people who work for the church, as people who are seen as, maybe having it more together than others, how do we choose who we let into that? Because it's very easy to just say, I'm going to deal with my own stuff and I got this.
Right.
Versus, I need to have people who can call me out. Yeah. I need to have people who see me for who I am, even if I'm the youth minister or the sister or whatever.
Right. I think it's been really interesting working with high schoolers and observing the ways that they grow in relationships with each other. And I think obviously the solution is not to go around and to tell every single person all of our problems, right? But I do think it is true, Sister Liz, that we need to be as authentic at 1 foot deep as we are at 30 feet deep, right? That we need to be the same person. Not that everybody's going to know everything that's happening in our lives, and that wouldn't be appropriate or prudent, but we need to be the same person as the teens that I work with, as I am with the person at the checkout line at the grocery store, as I am with my deepest and most intimate friends. And obviously they get to know more of that as they know more of me and more of my story. But I think what it really comes down to is being okay with not being okay, right? And and inviting, and I've even had a few conversations with my teens where I have not, divulged everything that's happened in my life or, the ups and downs of life, but I have said, would you pray for me? I'm going through a really hard time, and it's not up to you to fix it or to even really know what's happening. But that's pretty uncomfortable. That's not always the easiest place for me to be. But I think what cultivating that looks like is, as for us as public people in the church or whatever you want to call it, that ultimately what the Lord invites us to in a really deep and real and true way is to show the world our crosses with a complete confidence and faith and belief that in showing the world and the people in our lives and the people we minister to our crosses, we will show the glory of the empty grave and we will show them the glory of the resurrection.
Yeah.
But I think assenting to that when all we can see is the cross and all we can see it's hard. It's not easy and it's uncomfortable. But Jesus was okay with not being comfortable, and so we have to be too.
Right. I think Pope Francis gave us an excellent example of inviting people to pray for him when he first came out and was announced as Pope. Like, would you please pray for me? It's amazing. It's an important thing.
And it's only in whether it's, like I said, 1 foot deep or 30 feet deep, in allowing ourselves, because every time we open up at least a little bit of ourselves, we ultimately are allowing ourselves to be more seen, known, and loved by each other and by the Lord. And that is always a good thing, right? And that is always something that he wants to invite us to and something that, frankly, he calls us to.
And so as we look to, because there's only so many hours in the day,
right?
So much emotional energy that one can devote to friendships and relationships, ministry, community, all that jazz. How do you decide or take stock of the relationships that you have so that the ones that you're investing in are meaningful?
Yeah. I think there are a few things I'd say, Sister Liz, and the first thing in every relationship we have is to ask ourselves a question: is this bearing fruit? Jesus says, that we'll judge a tree by its fruit. And is this bearing fruit? Is it bringing life? That kind of, they're sort of interchangeable in that way. And so to ask ourselves in our relationships, is this bearing fruit? And what is that fruit in my own life? And that means there are friendships that we're going to have where they only really were bearing fruit for a season. And then, thanks be to God, we have friendships who continue to bear fruit. And so to sort of cultivate that and to know, I think, and there have been people in my life where we maintain a relationship out of sort of an unhealthy relationships out of obligation or out of fear of what life would look like if they weren't in it. And so to just encourage us, if there is anybody in your life who is causing division, or confusion or frustration or anxiety, they are not somebody that needs to be in your life, right? And I think, because we want to fix everybody, sometimes we allow and invite those people into our lives because we're like, oh, well, I can fix them, right? That's why some girls I'll never figure out, they date these really,
terrible guys
because they're like, but I'll fix him. Like, you can't fix him. Only Jesus can, right? But so to ask ourselves, is this bearing fruit or is this causing division and confusion? So to look at that, and I think to also then be okay with the reality that, Jesus had, his beloved disciple, he had John, then he had the 12, and then he had the 72. And so being okay with that, those were all very real and authentic relationships, and they just looked a little bit different. So realizing who is my maybe one, who is my 12, who's my 72. But to really asking ourselves a question, is this person bearing fruit in my life? Is this person helping me step into the promise of abundance that the Lord has already written over my life? Is this someone who is making me more of myself because they're showing me more of who God is?
Yeah, and I think it's a good idea to accept the fact that things change over time based on circumstances, based on people getting married or making other life choices or, moving away. And we have to think about and evaluate what's working,
right,
and what am I able to invest in. For me, in my community, am I investing in the sisters that I live with? And then and in my family members and in my close friends. But everybody has that.
Right.
Right.
And I think it's important to be reminded that, it's okay when certain relationships that the Lord gives them for a season. But on the other hand, and I think a big lie that we believe is we're so afraid of investing and pouring ourselves into people because we can't say what's going to happen in 6 months, a year, 5 years. There have been friends who I have been poured into by, and then at the drop of a hat really have sort of been plucked out of my life for varying reasons. Or friends that I was sort of like hesitant about, pouring into, and then now are some of my dearest friends. But don't be afraid of investing in the people that God has put in your life, and don't be afraid of pouring into them or being poured into by them. And I think, I look with such deep gratitude in my heart at, as someone who's in a position that has a really beautiful and wonderful community here in St. Louis, and also friends across the country and the world. These are people that I hope my kids know one day, right? And so I'm investing in them not just because it's good for me now, but ultimately it's good for, please God, my future husband and for my future family. And so to kind of keep that broader perspective too, because the Lord doesn't give us anything just for us, right? He gives it to us to allow us to go and to bear fruit around us. So to realize that, and that's why that friend saying to me on the phone all those months ago, I'm not going anywhere, with my close friends here in St. Louis, we sort of have a habit of saying really all the time, I'm in it for the long haul. I'm with you for the long haul. And I think that's something in a world that's so transitory and in a world that is so shallow, we need to hear, to know that there are people who are in it for the long haul.
And so, as you know, our podcast, In the Company of Charity, we have the lens of looking at the world in a certain way and having the spirit that we do of the service of the poor and looking out for those who are marginalized and forgotten. And so where's the connection there, and how do our friendships inform our service, or what does that mean for us as far as reaching out to people who are in need?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's such a beautiful thing that the Lord, as he did, invites us to sort of address the poverty of spirit that exists in each of us, right? And he invites us to, in our places of deepest poverty, deepest humiliation and shame and frustration and also deepest joys, he invites us to invite other people into that. And to, we can't give what we don't have, which is certainly true. And so before we can go out and be commissioned out into the world and to go and to preach the good news of the gospel, which is what we're called to do, we have to first know that about ourselves, right? And you, Sister Liz, you have to first be known in your relationship with the Lord and then in your community before you can hope to do anything else, right? And so I think what friendship does is it emboldens us and ultimately commissions us to go and to reach out and to share that good news with each other. And we have a God who says in the 15th chapter of John, the Gospel of John, he says, I no longer call you slaves, I call you friends. And so I think our lens as Christians, our lens as people who are called to serve and to love the poor is the lens of a God who says, I no longer call you slaves, I call you friends. You know, it's funny, I have that written in script above my toilet, which is about the weirdest place for a scripture passage ever. But I want to be reminded every day when I'm brushing my teeth that we have a God who says, I no longer call you slaves, I call you friends. And that is good news. And that we are commissioned from the place of a God who says, you're not a slave, you're a friend. Mm-hmm. And I think that is sort of what that is, a deep love and a deep and abiding love that we are called to. And when that is really lived in Christian community and in friendships, that is what will bring the gospel to life into the world around us.
Beautiful. Beautiful. We could talk for hours and hours and hours.
So stay tuned for part 2 through 17.
2 through 17 of this podcast. We thank you so much, Lauren, for being a part of this, because this is just so much fun.
It is.
So let's go out and be good friends and be lights, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
Thank you.
Bye.
And now it's time for your Vincentian Pulse.
When I think about the friendship of St. Vincent de Paul and St. Louise de Marillac, I think about the coming together of souls that could have only been brought together by God. And later in their life, Vincent particularly, and I'm sure Louise also, but Vincent definitely reflected on how it was only God and divine providence that could have brought them together. St. Vincent wasn't too excited about the scrupulousness of St. Louise. And St. Louise wasn't very excited about the class level, of St. Vincent. In fact, she even talked about the repugnance of having to accept him as a spiritual director at the time, when her current spiritual director was instructing her to move on to Vincent de Paul. She really didn't want to embrace that relationship at all. But they both trusted in God and trusted in the people around them, directing them toward each other. And the amazingness is that they would have over 30 years of a relationship, not originally working with the confraternities of charity, which is what we call here in the United States the Ladies of Charity, and then beginning the Daughters of Charity of St. Vincent de Paul. And all the way to the end of their life, I often think about how married couples often, who are really close to each other, at the end of their lives, they often die within a very short time of each other. And that is what happened with St. Louise and St. Vincent. They died in the same year, within months of each other. St. Louise died first, and then St. Vincent de Paul just some months later. And I think somehow by that point in their lives, they really were of one heart, one mission. They certainly had their separate lives, but they even just lived pretty basically across the street from each other, running their communities and deferring to each other for many things. I think of them as a friendship based on divine providence, trust in the people around them, trust in God for so many things that they didn't have right before them, and sincere love of each other and the differences that each other possessed authentically, and just deep respect. They have a lot to teach us, and we have so much to learn from how much they certainly cared for each other and loved each other.
This has been In the Company of Charity podcast. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.